Hey guys, it's Katie, and I'm here today to do a review of Nevermoor, The Trials of Morrigan by Jessica Townsend. Now, for those of you who don't know what this book is about, it follows our young protagonist named Morrigan Crow, who up to this point has led a cursed life because she is a child who was born on Eventide, and that's said to be incredibly unlucky and kind of just a bad omen. And so on her 11th birthday, she, instead of dying, she gets whisked off to this magical land called Nevermoor by this fellow named Jupiter North. And then when she gets there, she kind of finds out that she's participating in these trials in order to become a member of this really well-renowned society. In order to become a member, she has to participate in all of these different trials. And that's just kind of the gist of what this book is all about. So as usual, I'm going to break it down by world building, characters, plot, and the writing. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about some things that a lot of people bring up in their reviews and discussions of this book, and I want to just kind of give my own take on things. So a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, compare this book and this series to Harry Potter. I'm going to say you really shouldn't do that, because this book and this series can stand on its own very, very clearly. I mean, just because it takes place kind of in a magical school setting, and the treatment of the character at the beginning was kind of a similar situation to Harry, and just kind of like the trials kind of reminds you of the Triwizard Tournament a little bit. It is really, really nothing, and I mean nothing, like Harry Potter. You can't compare them, and I just don't like doing that anyway. Like, whenever people say that to me, it automatically puts a red flag up. It's just too hard to do that. That said, it does have some similarities, and I can understand where the comparisons come from. But at the same time, it was just like, because I had that preconceived notion going in, I was looking for the comparisons. And I'm just gonna say, don't do that. Go in clean slate and just kind of read it for its own merit, kind of a thing. That said, let's jump on into each of the elements, as I always do. So, starting with the writing, I enjoyed the writing well enough. Jessica Townsend is very descriptive, and she is very, is able to pace herself fairly well. It wasn't the strongest point of the book, but it was okay nonetheless. But as you guys know at this point, I don't tend to focus too hardcore on the writing when I'm reading a book. So let's just move on to the next thing. The next thing I want to talk about is the plot. The plot was okay. There were a lot of really interesting elements and really large chunks of the book that were executed really well. But then there were a lot of things that were just not so great. So let's talk about the things that were not so great first and kind of end on a positive note. So the things that weren't so great about it is there were a lot of kind of plot holes, or a lot of things that were kind of put in there for convenience sake. And it just kind of was just like sprung out of nowhere, and it just kind of didn't really make sense as to why it was happening. That was kind of my biggest issue with it, is just like a lot of convenient plot holes or convenient plot devices just thrown in. I don't want to go into any spoilers or anything, so I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. But no going in that there are a lot of like weird plot things that are going on that don't necessarily make sense or add up. Also, in some ways, I thought the plot was like a little bit, it was very disjointed in some ways. Like, there were definitely parts I was really, really drawn into the story, but then there were parts that I was kind of taken out. For instance, the trials were always very, very captivating, but then kind of like the in-between scenes were not as captivating, so I kind of found myself drifting a little bit. That didn't mean I didn't love it, because I really did enjoy this world. I enjoyed being here. But just the way it was written and some of the way that the plot was executed just really didn't work as well as I would have liked. Let's talk about the characters. I thought the characters were somewhat interesting, but at the same time they were very kind of superficial. We did not get as much depth into their lives as I wanted to. It was like little smatterings here and there, and it was just kind of adds to the disjointed plot kind of a thing, so the characters were very much like the plot. I also wasn't a huge fan of Morrigan herself. I actually found her to be quite irritating at times. I mean, did she have interesting aspects to her? Absolutely. But I also found her to just be sort of lacking in other areas, and she just could have been fleshed out more as a character than we got to see her as. As for the side characters, it's kind of a similar thing. In some ways, I felt like I got to know some of the side characters better than Morrigan herself. Like the big bad, I felt like I got to know a little bit more about him and his backstory than anything else. But his backstory also reminded me of certain aspects of other books. So I mean, that was a little bit strange at the same time. And, you know, he was kind of set out to be kind of like this big mysterious character kind of at the outset. But if you're like me, you were kind of going to see that right off the bat. Jupiter, I loved Jupiter's character so much. He was such an interesting, fun, whimsical, just enigmatic character, and I really liked him. But he was also missing for large chunks of the book, and that just made me kind of a little bit sad. Some of the other characters we got to know were, I don't know, we got to know them because they were part of the world, but we didn't get to know them, if you know what I mean. Didn't know what their exact purpose was, except for, you know, kind of being there, adding to the experience. It's hard to explain it without going into specifics, but I didn't love the characters as much as I wanted to. But that said, I'm interested to see how things get fleshed out more in book 2, because it's a series, so I mean, this is kind of like a get to know you character kind of a thing, whereas, and then as the series goes on, I'm sure we'll get to see a bunch of character growth. But in book 1, I just was not fully captivated by most of the characters, at least as much as I wanted to be. I was invested enough in Morrigan's story to care, but there were certain things that I was just like, okay, I'm not feeling the connection that I think you want me to feel here. Also, one thing that was like really weird was there was kind of like setting it up for like the big enemy person, kind of like for the school thing, and then it just kind of seemed like that plot point ended at the end of the book, and I don't know if it's going to continue. It really wasn't clear to me. I'm believing to be true is that it kind of like ended in this book, like I'm led to believe, and she's not going to be in book 2. Then that kind of interaction / build up was kind of for nothing. And then last but certainly not least is the world building. Honestly, the world building is really, really where this book stuck out. This was its strong point. The world building of, where Morrigan grew up, and then ultimately the world building of Nevermoor itself was fascinating and really just explained pretty well. Like, I was able to visualize the scenes that I was supposed to get from the book. I just really, really enjoyed the world building overall. It was very whimsical, very unique and interesting, and I'd be very, very interested to see where it goes from there. And also the magic system and just kind of like the trials themselves are very interesting, especially Morrigan's specific knack, as they call them in the books. It's very interesting, and I'll be very interested to see where it goes. But yeah, overall, I liked the book. Was it my new favorite thing, like for a lot of other people? No. But did I hate it? No. Which, if you haven't noticed lately, is kind of a big accomplishment for me because I've not loved most of the books I've been reading lately. So this was a bit of an improvement on a lot of that. So I call this one a win. Overall, I really liked it, but there were certain aspects that irritated me. Just to recap, the characters weren't fleshed out as much as I would have liked them to be. The plot had a lot of weird things in it. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier that really irritated me was saying things like, oh, this thing is really, really important, but I'm going to tell you about it later. No, you're talking about it now, so explain it now. I get that you want to have this weird, mysterious air surrounding the thing, but don't do that, because then I've talked to a few other people who had issues with that too, and I'm just like, your readers will lose interest if you do that. So it's just like really irritating. But anyway, then the writing was okay. It had a lot of bad, I don't know how to describe the writing. It was mediocre, I guess, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. And then the world building was definitely 100% where this book stood out. I really enjoyed the world building a lot. So anyway, if you guys have read this book, or if you're planning on reading this book, feel free to let me know down below, or come talk to me on social media if you want to know a little bit more about this, or if you've read it and you want to talk more spoiler stuff, feel free to come over there as well, and we can chat about it over there.